Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us for a virtual day trip to wine country. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Virtual day trip to wine country is presented by Citi. I'm Sam Kimball from New York Wine Events, and we're really excited to be here. We are today traveling west again. We're going to the gorgeous Sonoma County area again, and we are going to be visiting an awesome winery there. I'm going to show you a little bit of the beautiful background that we are going to be seeing these images. We are going to be going to the Carneros, Sonoma area, which is the home of Cline Family Cellars, an awesome winery in Sonoma. Carneros, Sonoma American Viticultural Association is an area where you see influencing from the cooling effect of the Pacific Ocean and a combination of summer fog, warm days, long growing season. The Carneros wine region is an independent AVA. It's its own area. We're going to be tasting some wines today that are from a neighboring AVA, but the winery Cline Family Cellars is actually in that Carneros area. It's in the south end of Sonoma. It's one of the first wineries that you see, that you run into after you've entered the region, the Sonoma County area, after leaving San Francisco. The Golden Gate, drive through Mill Valley, and pretty soon you're right there by Cline Family Cellars. The calling card of Cline Family Cellars is that it's a Zinfandel producer of great renown. They produce Zinfandel wines from two great regions, Oakley and Lodi, but it's also known for producing some amazing Rhone style, French Rhone style wines, and also known for producing some lesser known varietal selections, which we're going to talk a little bit about. To learn all about Cline Family Cellars, you can visit ClineCellars.com. That's ClineCellars.com. And today, I'm thrilled to announce we have a deal, spoiler alert. We are offering, Cline Cellars is offering 30% off. That's right, you heard me right, 30% off of the wines that we're tasting today through the end of June. Just use the promo code ZAPCLINE, Z-A-P like Peter, Klein, and the code is active now. If you have questions, as always, during our session tasting, and please hit us with questions as we're talking, put them in the Q&A module in Zoom or in the chat module, and we will tackle them. Speaking of the chat module, hit the chat module, people, and let us know where you are tuning in from. We love to hear from you guys. Tell us where you're tuning in from. We have been getting people from all over creation attending our broadcast of Day Trip to Wine Country. I see that Tina is coming in from Phoenix, Arizona. That is awesome. Thank you, Tina. At New York Wine Events, we have worked with Cline Family Cellars at some of our events, namely the Zinfandel Experience NYC. So it's really a pleasure today to host a winemaker from Klein, Charlie Tsegeletos. Welcome, Charlie. Great having you here.
Good to be here, Sam. Thanks for having me.
Well, I have to say today we're going to taste Zinfandels, but at New York Wine Events, a big part of our mission is discovery and education. And the fact of the matter is, I'm always pushing our audience and the people who come to our events and our guests and on our tours to try new great varietals. And Klein has done pioneering work with varietals of many types over the years, and not just the usual suspects like Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey you guys have had?
Sure. Fred Klein started his winery in 1982, and he had moved up from Los Angeles to live with his grandparents in Contra Costa County in a little town called Oakley. Surrounding his father's property, there's a lot of historic vines, and those historic vines were planted by Spanish and Portuguese and Italian settlers, and there are things like Carignane and Petit Syrah and Mourvedre. So we make those wines in addition to the 5 Zinfandels we make, and in addition to all the other Rhone variety, the cooler grown Rhone varieties that we grow up here in Sonoma. So Mourvedre is just a real fun one of ours. It's part of our Ancient Vine series. Those vines date back to the early 1900s. They've just got a chocolate and a cherry character to it, and they share, along with our Ancient Vine Zinfandel series, which we're going to taste. They're all head trained and dry farmed, and they're hand picked, and they're low yielding, and we sell them at a really reasonable price. But if you like cherry and chocolate, Mourvedre is just a wonderful grape variety.
That's great. I mean, I have to say, I mean, Mourvedre, Carignane, these are grapes, everybody. And most of us Americans are very boring, and we don't know much about grapes that have those names. We drink Pinot Noir and Merlot and Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc. So it's great that you guys have done so much work in that area with a variety of different types of grapes. I do want to give a shout out to some folks in our audience. Since I am a native New Yorker, shout out to Tamara coming to us from the Bronx. We've got people coming in from Santa Clarita, California. Thank you, Susan. David from Minneapolis. That is awesome. And Janet from Long Island. So we've got a great group here. And by the way, Charlie, no pressure, but Rona has logged in and is watching from Sydney, Australia.
Wow, Rona,
No
thanks
pressure.
for joining us.
So,
Yeah, Sam, another interesting thing about Mourvedre is if you look at the history of that thing, it was a Spanish variety that went to the south of France. In America, in California, it was one of the most popular grapes in like Santa Clara County, for instance. And you go back into the 30s, there were a lot more of that planted than there is now. Now there's maybe 1,000 acres of Mourvedre. Compare that to 100,000 acres of Chardonnay. So that's where it's fun to explore these.
And where again is Mourvedre, the grape type, from originally?
It originated in Spain, and then it made its way to the south of France, but it's one of the key components in a GSM. And you see GSMs made by the Southern Rhone producers, a GSM being a Grenache Syrah Mourvedre. We make one. We make a Grenache Syrah Mourvedre we call Cashmere, and then the Australians do a lot with it too. So the grape is now kind of planted all over the world, but
Wow.
you see a lot as a blender, but it's just a wonderful standalone and fun to try. Ancient Vine, Klein Ancient Vine Mourvedre.
Hey, Rona, let us know if you've had an Australian Mourvedre. That sounds really cool.
They might
all right,
call it Mataro.
so next question. This is going to sound weird, and everybody's going to think that I've really gone off the reservation, but there's a little saying or a way to remember, it's like an anagram in the wine business, and it is, and I have to ask you what this means. What, Charlie, does never punch kittens mean?
Never punch kittens. NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. It's just funny. There are a certain number of macro and micronutrients that keep plant healthy, keep us healthy. And NPK, that's one way to remember those key macronutrients. But there's also another one, which is C. Hopkins Cafe, mighty good, where each of those words, the first letter stands for an atom. And those are key varietals. I'm not even sure how we got on that subject, but yeah, never punch kittens.
You mentioned it when we were talking earlier today, and I wanted to share it with the audience.
Sure.
Because it's such an interesting thing. Now, is that the kind of thing that only a winemaker learns that anagram, or is that for all wine enthusiasts?
No, the funny thing is anybody that looks at a bag of fertilizer is going to see NPK and the ratios that are part of that, because it's key fertilizers. We don't really use any synthetic fertilizers. We're trying to build up the microbial population so it captures the nitrogen from the atmosphere and fixes it and makes those nice black bricks, deep, rich soil. So that's part of our thing here at Klein.
Well, let's talk about that. We live in an age where, with good reason, many of us are hugely interested in how pure the foods and beverages we consume are. And I know that you guys have over the years more and more become, more pure in the winemaking process, you know, cutting down on or eliminating things like pesticides. Talk about that purity
Okay.
Journey.
Well, what we've done in the last 10 years, we've pretty much eliminated pesticides and herbicides, with the exception of organic sulfur that we use to keep powdery mildew at bay. We haven't figured a way around that, and really neither has the industry, I don't think, for the largely. But if you look at how we're farming and how we're making wine, we're doing really as little as possible. We've got 2,000 solar panels sitting on the roof that supply us all of our energy needs, with the exception of a little propane for the boiler there. We getting back out in the vineyards, you see the sheep behind me. We run a herd of about 4,000 different Suffolk and white-faced sheep, and we'll put them out in the vineyard to eat those weeds a few times a year. We'll fence them in with electric wires. We'll fence them in little 10-acre pieces, and then we guard them with Pyrenees so that the coyotes don't come down and get them. But they're just wonderful when it comes to eating weeds down, and at certain times of the year before the grapes get nice and ripe, they'll actually help us eat the leaves where we want leaves pulled to allow more sunlight onto the vines and things.
The leaves of the grapevines.
The leaves of the grapevine. They won't eat grapes yet because they're not very tasty. And then you get them out of there before they do get tasty.
Right, because once the grapes get nice and tasty, they will eat your grapes.
It's fair game. And they say if you put a goat in there, it'll eat anything, but a sheep will actually eat.
So let me make sure I understood what you said. 4,000 sheep.
Yeah.
You unleash on the vineyard. Wow.
And
how many acres are you unleashing 4,000 sheep on?
Well, we're farming roughly about 1,000 acres of grapes. So they move around, and they've got their own dedicated sheep herders and things.
Is that right?
You'll see them in different vineyards, and you'll see the tourists out there taking pictures with the sheep, and they're wonderful little fertilizing machines, and they also keep the ground clear so that the raptors can see things like see the rodents running through there. So they help their little flying brethren to get food too. But in addition to that, we'll chop up things like oyster shells and crab shells, and we use that to supply a little calcium to the vineyard. We cover crops and we compost, and we're really good about watching how much water we use and recapturing what we can. So, that's kind of on the vineyard side of things. And then on the winemaking side of things, where we do things a little differently is we'll settle the juice. We don't use any enzymes at all. So we'll settle the juice before fermentation. If it takes a little bit longer, it takes a little bit longer. So no enzymes. During fermentation, we'll taste each of the fermenters daily. And when we get the amount of tannin we want, we press the juice off the skins. And where that's significant is it means we don't have to come back and fine out. We don't have to try and capture that tannin and remove it by using egg whites or isinglass or gelatin. So we don't use any fining agents in our red wine making. So we're vegan friendly too.
Wow. So are some of the wines actually purely vegan or more?
All of our wines are vegan.
Okay, guys, newsflash. Cline Family Cellars, all their wines are vegan. So we've been talking about purity and lack of pesticides and herbicides. That's amazing. That's really cool.
Yeah.
So when the winery really got going, we were founded in 1982, correct?
82. Yeah, 82 was Fred's first harvest.
What's been the prevailing kind of approach and philosophy to winemaking from 1982 to the present? What's been the common theme?
I don't think things have changed that much, to be honest with you. I think Fred's kind of farmed how he learned to farm from his grandfather, how they farm. If you go to Oakley, California, Contra Costa County, where we're going to taste the bulk of the wines we're going to taste are coming from that area, you'll see head-trained vines where they used to run tractors both ways. You won't see necessarily a lot of wires on the stuff we're growing. In other words, they're planted, they're head trained, so they're freestanding. There's freestanding vines. They're not supported by a wire at all. There's only 8 to 10 inches of rainfall in that area a year, but that whole area, what's cool about it is it's just south of the big Sacramento Delta, and California's two biggest rivers, the San Joaquin and the Sacramento. And so there's a little bit of a higher water table. So even though they're only getting 8 to 10 or 11 inches of rain a year, these gnarly old vines that are dating back to the early 1900s, they seem to handle the drought okay. They're not high yielding or anything. They take more attention, and it's all hand work, so it's expensive to work them. But it's just kind of an amazing area. It's like stepping back in time. And that's what we're going to taste tonight, or today is are some of our zins from that region.
That's great. Well, in a minute, we're gonna do a quick tour, look at some cool images of the winery and the vineyards. Before we do that, I want a little shout out to Kara from North Haven, Connecticut, who visited Cline Cellars last June.
Well, congratulations.
as it was awesome. So, all right. So let's take a look at some of the scenery there. You talk a lot about old vines. What are we looking at here? I'll move out of the way. So
you are looking at an old head-trained Zinfandel vine. And I don't know if you can see how deep or take a look at that soil. The first time I went out there, was when Fred hired me as winemaker 18 years ago. I hadn't been out there before. And walking around, I just felt like I was on the beach. It was crazy. And what that stuff allows that old vine to do is exist on its own rootstock. So that hasn't been grafted to a phylloxera resistant American root, because the phylloxera walks from vine to vine in cracked and checked soils. It doesn't in the sand. So that phylloxera can't exist in the sand. So we've got these ancient vines on their own roots, which really makes them a treasure. So you're looking at an old gnarly zin that looks like it's starting to color up a little bit.
So let me show it to everybody again. This is guys, is an ancient vine. You see how thick and big the actual trunk, or the bark covered part of the vine is. And Charlie, you're right. That thing is in sand. I mean, it is dry there.
It is in sand. And the amazing thing is, I mean, if you saw it, you'd see that it was, and this is kind of a downside, it's pretty low to the ground too. Mm-hmm. A lot of wind, there's a lot of wind that blows through Oakley, so it's protected a little bit in a sense by being a little bit lower, but hand working it's a little bit tougher.
And as we look at this is how old exactly?
Oh, that could be, if that's in our big Break vineyard, which I think it might be, that thing's going back to 1904.
Wow.
It's going back to 1904, and here's kind of a fun fact, Sam. Let's see if I've got it.
So it's about almost 120 years old, this vine.
Yeah. So 1904, Teddy Roosevelt was president when that thing was planted. Okay, and work had just begun on the Panama Canal.
Wow. And so when you look at this vine, it was planted in 1904 when Teddy Roosevelt was president. On what year, how many years forward from that did it start producing grapes that could really make wine?
Generally, you'll get a grapevine if you plant that thing, and they probably hand delivered water in a wagon to that thing the first year or two, but you'll start getting grapes after 3 or 4 leaves, and then you'll pretty much be in full production after that. So it does. I mean, it's just not something, you don't just plant grapes and say, "Oh, I'll have grapes for wine next year." It takes you 3 or 4 years to really get those things going.
So when you harvest the grapes,
yeah,
they get crushed and they get put into these tanks. Am I right?
They do.
And what's that process? They get crushed, they get destemmed, and then what happens in the tanks?
We don't actually crush them. So what we do is the way the crusher stemmer works are there's 2 rubber rollers that as the berries go through there, it crushes them. Well, you can pull those rubber rollers back, which we've done. So all we do is destem it. So we end up with a fair percentage of whole cluster in there. So it's really a gentle way to begin the process with those grapes. But we do destem it. So then that's your must. You've got skins and seeds and juice all gets pumped by way of must pump into one of these tanks. And you see the dimpled jacket around that thing?
Yep.
Food grade glycol is pumped through that jacket, and it allows us to control the temperature of the fermentation. So we've got a magic number where we cap that fermentation, because when you're turning that sugar, say you bring in that old vine Zin and you bring it in, it's 25% sugar. You hear the term bricks all the time, 25 degrees bricks. Bricks is percent soluble solid, so it also includes the organic acids and things in it. So let's say it's just 25% sugar. Each degrees bricks is going to turn into 0.6% alcohol, and it's each one is going to generate 2.3 degrees Fahrenheit. So you can actually get those things pretty darn warm if you don't watch the temperature.
Mm-hmm.
Over, which cools it, but then we also cap the temperature by using those cooling jackets.
And then
daily.
After a period of time, they make their way for these Zins. They make their way to the barrels. Yeah, and here here in my background, we have the barrel room. Yeah,
we've got about 3,000 barrels out there, and they're a great way to age a wine. So that we'll ferment it, and that'll take 7 to 10 days generally. And then it's time you've still got all the skins in there, so it's time to press the juice free of the skins. So you press the juice free, you settle that for another week or 10 days, and then you can find your way to a barrel, depending on the style wine you're going to make.
All right, so we're going to start tasting Zinfandels here, and I think we're going to start with I'm going to put it up on my screen. I believe we're starting with the Old Vine Lodi Zinfandel. This is this wine is your top selling wine, I believe, and if I'm not mistaken, it's really fairly competitively priced at $10.99 roughly. You can find this in almost any retailer in the U.S. But tell us about this one and its tasting notes and an ideal food.
Okay, so this is coming from Lodi. Lodi is a region that's between Sacramento and Stockton. It's east of the San Francisco Bay. It's east of the Carquinez Strait, and it's east of the Sacramento Delta. And it benefits, even though it's in a warm kind of Central Valley environment, it benefits from those cooling breezes. So you get the benefit of having a warm day, which you want warm. Growing Zinfandel, growing certain varieties requires heat, some more than others. Pinot Noir is a much more efficient user of sunlight, so you don't have to have it as hot as trying to grow Zinfandel. So you get a nice warm day, but then you get a cool evening, so you hang on to your acid. So we've got 4 growers that we buy from in Lodi, and they're all third and fourth generation farmers. So they really know what they do. It's their livelihood. Lodi is a Mediterranean climate. This wine sees French oak, it sees new French oak, about 30%, so we don't tend to over oak the wine. But for me, if you're looking for key components, which you really want to get, what I really think is kind of the key elements of a Zinfandel, 2 things: strawberry and spice. So what I get out of this guy is there's a strawberry element, cherry element to it. There's a little spice. We picked this one around 24 degrees bricks. So the alcohol is about 14.5 or so. So it's a medium bodied wine. Mm-hmm. When you're talking about alcohol is really what gives a wine its body for the most part. So high alcohol, you can have a lot of body, but then you better have it balanced with the fruit and the tannin and the other components of the wine. Low alcohol, it's much lighter in the mouth. This is a medium bodied wine. It's very easy to drink. There's a moderate amount of tannin that comes from the skins and comes from the seeds and the stems if they're in there. But I'd pair this with a medium-bodied food, especially one that's got a little bit of tomato in it. I mean, it'd be ideal with a pizza.
Yep. And you answered Andrea's question, which was what kind of wood is used for aging your Zin? Well, in the case of this one, new French oak. This one
is French oak, yeah. And this is, I've forgotten the percentage of new, but if a wine sits in a brand new barrel, 100% new barrel, and you get that 60 gallons, that's considered 100% new oak. If the barrel's 2 years, if the barrel's a year old and you refill it, then you get 50% new oak because you get about that much oak extraction.
Yeah.
So if you've got one neutral barrel and one new barrel and you combine it, it's 50% new oak. So that's how you think about it. And this guy's between 30 and 40% new oak. We don't want to over oak it. Yeah.
So this goes great with pizza. And
So.
and it's $10.99, people. I mean, oh my God. I love these California Zinfandels. They're absolutely scrumptious and delicious. And we have a question from one of our viewers. Keith asks, why does it matter how old the vines are?
You know, I've had great Zinfandels made from young vines and great Zinfandels made from old vines too. But generally, and these vines, these 4 growers are producing grapes that were planted between 1904 and 1968 for this low-die old vine Zin. So these are fairly old. But the older vines, they tend to produce a lower crop, and you've got a lower crop, you get a little bit more flavor intensity generally. So that's what I'd say the benefit really is.
Yep. Okay, we're going to move on to the next wine, which will be the Ancient Vines Zinfandel. Unlike the first wine, which is only available in retail, you can't get it at ClineCellars.com. That first wine we just talked about. The next 3, including this next one, the Ancient Vines Zinfandel, are available on ClineCellars.com. So let me pull it up and show everybody what the bottle looks like for the Ancient Vines. And tell us about the origin of this. And
okay, are you ready?
Yep.
All right, Sam. So this is our 2018 Ancient Vines Zinfandel. It comes from about 20 different vineyards in that Contra Costa area, in that Oakley area. The 2016 vintage, of which this is very much like, the Wine Spectator rated it 40th out of their top 100 wines of the world out of 17 wine. So and we make it just as the 18's made just exactly the same way. I mean, it was a wonderful score. Everything just blew out of there. But if you want to taste a very similar wine, try this 2018. Again, we've got some of our estate vineyards play into this, but it's that head trained stuff. It's dry farmed, it's low yielding, but it's 100%. This one is all American oak. So the flavors, I'd say if I had to differentiate a little bit, you still get that strawberry and spice, but you've got a little bit of the brown sugar you get from caramelizing that American oak, those wood sugars. So it contributes a real neat, it's almost like a molasses component to it.
And is that getting that molasses component? Is that why you use American oak barrels for this?
It is for this particular program. Yeah. It was just, I really like the Cooper, and it's a nice oak.
I have not tried this one yet. I'm dying to. I love molasses. I mean, I love all Zinfandel, but and I'm imagining that this has a higher alcohol content and a bigger body than the first one.
You know what? This particular vintage, it's about the same. 14.5 is not a wimpy alcohol content, so it's kind of right in that same zone. So it's kind of a medium bodied. In the past, it's been a little bit higher, but this vintage, it was that's what we came up with. Every different.
With that brown sugar and molasses added to the kind of the taste elements, what's a food that goes well with this Ancient Vines Zinfandel?
You know, I think if you like the wine and you like the food, they're gonna pretty much work out. So I'd almost make this with something that had kind of a similar weight food wise.
Mm-hmm.
So heck, you could grill a steak and it would be just fine, I think.
Yep. And this one, everybody, is $22 on ClineCellars.com. Again, there's a 30% off promo code, 30% off. Use that promo code ZAP-Klein, Z-A-P like Peter, Klein, and the code is active through the end of June.
This is the least expensive entry into kind of our Contra Costa wines with the head trained and the dry farmed and the unrooted and the old vine. So it's a good way to introduce yourself to it.
All right, so we're going to move from this one. We're moving up in terms of price point a little bit. We're going to the 2017 Live Oak Zinfandel. Everybody, this is what this bottle looks like. It's $37 on ClineCellars.com. Again, that's before the discount. What is the distinguishing characteristic of this Zinfandel, Charlie, versus the others?
Okay, this Zinfandel comes from two different vineyards on Live Oak Road in Oakley. And this is a vineyard, we generally pick this about as ripe as we pick any of our Zinfandel. And we leave a little bit of a sweet element in this wine. And sometimes you can even pick up a hint of a raisin, not an overpowering raisin, but a delicate raisin in the background. One of these, the two vineyards is, you've got Remedi and you've got Marchetti. And Remedi was planted in 1904. That was our whole Panama Canal thing. But this wine, the alcohol is 15.5%. So you're going to get the weight in this wine. So you would pair this with a big food, I think.
Yeah.
Because it can handle anything. You could blacken everything from blackened ahi to you name it.
Well, also you could do spaghetti and meatballs.
Spaghetti and meatball would be great. It's a round. It really is a. It's a round strawberry Zinfandel.
We're getting into my territory now, Charlie. This is the stuff I love. These big California Zins, and I don't mind the high alcohol content. Does this wine make you thirsty or hungry?
This one might be pointing me toward the time to eat a little something.
Because it's got some wallop to it.
It's pretty savory. The nice thing about, in my opinion, nice thing about Zinfandel is as a fairly, different wines have different acid levels and tannin levels. You get hillside Cabernets that are very mouth-puckeringly tannic. That can vary too. But Zinfandel tends to have a little bit more acid than some of the other varieties, and I like that. It kind of makes that strawberry pop, and I'm getting that out of this.
That's awesome. We do have a question, which I'd like to take here in the midst of the tasting, which is from John. Which of the Klein wines has the least amount of sulfites for folks who are sulfite sensitive?
Right. We are pretty judicious with our use of sulfur dioxide. So if you were to run any of our wines, you're going to find under 100 parts per million in the total sulfur zone. So really, we kind of treat them all the same. But I'd say this wine, for instance, this has probably got 70 parts per million total, and free is because it's the sulfur dioxide is the stuff that it keeps certain bad microbes at bay, and it protects against oxygen a little bit, and it's been used for a couple hundred years. But I'd say free is probably under 20 parts per million. So there's minimal amount of SO2 in our wines. There's a little few we can get by.
And correct me if I'm wrong, it's not the sulfites in a wine or in a red wine that when you drink a red wine gives you a headache. That would be more the tannins, yeah?
Well, and you can ask a doctor that question. It's something to do, they think it's something to do with the natural histamines that are produced that cause some kind of, and I'm not a doctor, so you really need to talk to a doctor, some kind of prostaglandin reaction, and then give you a headache. And I've heard people tell me, take an Advil half an hour before, if you get red wine headaches, take an Advil before you drink the red wine and see if that blocks it. So I don't know. That's really something to talk over with your doctor.
I mean, as a big lover of red Zins from California, I do get the headaches, and the Advil does help. We have one other question before we hit the last selection in the tasting. Michael has a question. How has California's persistent drought condition affected the quality and quantity of the vintage or of the harvest over the years?
Yeah, we have had a persistent drought. I mean, we had a little respite a couple of years ago, but this year is being pretty dry too. We're lucky enough that we've got the wells and reservoirs that we've had enough water to keep our things going. And then we've got those dry farmed vineyards in Oakley that seem to have done okay. But I think it's definitely on everybody's mind how to recharge these wells and all. But I'd say we've had some big harvests. All of our harvests in the last 10 years have been between 3.8 million and 4.7 million tons of wine grapes. So we're continuing to get pretty decent harvests, but we're just all getting smarter about using water, whether it's, the way we monitor when a vine needs water, and just trying to use as little as we can and get the same results.
How many cases of wine does Cline Family Cellars produce each year?
All total, let me just say this: the two biggest items are the Lodi Zin and the Ancient Vines that I tasted first and second, and they are probably 2/3 of our production. The wine, this Live Oak Zin that I'm tasting right now, we do 1,247 cases of it.
Wow.
So, and yeah.
So it's small production.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the big guys where the cases are in the millions, we're not half of that.
Right. But you're into six figures of cases of wine.
We are into six figures, and it's primarily that our Lodi Zin and that Ancient Vine Zin too.
Right. So just to clarify for everybody watching, this third wine, the Live Oak Zinfandel, which is $37 before the discount code, is only 1,200 cases. So it's very few bottles are made. And then the next one, which I have on my screen right now, is the big Break Zinfandel, also $37 before the discount on ClineCellars.com. And I'm assuming that this one is relatively low production number as well.
This guy has 597 cases.
Oh my God.
Okay, so this one is pretty close to the river, pretty close to that's the San Joaquin right there. Deep sandy soil, old vines again. The unique thing about this wine is it has eucalyptus trees kind of throughout the vineyard. So you pick up a little of that eucalyptus mint that's been a signature for this big Break Zin for years. The Australians kind of figured out that eucalyptol, that character was coming. They thought it was windborne, the oils that get on the grapes. But then they also determined that it's leaves and things that get tangled up with the grapes that act almost like a tea bag. And you pick up a little bit of that really interesting eucalyptus mint, which I really like. That's
so cool. That's the first time I've really thought about a eucalyptus tasting note or element in a wine. And the fact that the eucalyptus trees are right there, of course, is why, but that's really cool.
Yeah.
We have a question about the Cline Family Cellars location, which I think you said the tasting room was originally built in what year?
The tasting room home was, or it used to be a home, and it was built in the 1850s.
Wow.
And the location, we're about an hour north of San Francisco. We're 5 miles north of the international racetrack that's there in Sonoma International Raceway. But no, it's a really historic property. There's 350 acres here. Fred and Nancy Klein bought it in 1989, and there's a lot of neat historical aspects to it. And I think you and I were chatting about the carp. That's kind of a neat story.
Give the short version of the carp story.
Okay.
And then I want to answer. Ron has a question about the winery and the tasting room, but tell the carp story. I think it's really cool.
Okay. Well, the fellow that owned this place, Julius Poppy, back in the 1850s, he had the idea because he saw California growing, he saw the country growing. He had the idea to import carp fingerlings, the fish, carp fingerlings from Germany, from Holstein, Germany, because he knew that over there it was an industry and people ate a lot of carp. So he brought over the first European/German carp to America and raised them in the ponds out behind our tasting room when you come to visit. And so then he introduced them to the country where they were planted all over the place. We have got the descendants of the first carp to be brought into America, and you can feed them behind the barn. So it's kind of fun.
That's very cool. So Ron says, I was at the winery 11 years ago and it had a adorable small tasting room and great landscape with a pond or river right there. Has anything changed since then with your landscape or tasting room?
We've added, when he was there, we had these bird cots where we had wild pheasant in it so you could go and look at the birds too. We've turned those into outdoor cabanas so you can have more of a personalized tasting experience, which works out well with the new conditions we're tasting wine under. And we've opened up a couple of other tasting spots. But other than that, you know, a fresh coat of paint, it's pretty much the same place.
Ron, you got to come back when we're off of quarantine. When are you opening, Charlie?
Friday.
Friday.
We are opening Friday. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right. So tell us a little bit about what would be the big Break Zinfandel. What food would you pair that with? It's got a little of that eucalyptus tasting note.
It's a big wine again. It's big bodied. It also has an elevated tannin level to it. So I'd say if you've got an elevated tannin level, that mouth puckering tannin, you'd want a food that had a fatty element to it, so that tannin could cleave through it and expose that.
How about baby back ribs?
Yeah, that would work. That would work very well. I mean, you could do any kind of big, flavorful, fatty food with this wine, and I think it would be a joyous combination.
That's awesome. All right, so all of these wines, the last three, are available on ClineCellars.com. Use the promo code ZAP, Z-A-P like Peter, Klein. Promo code is ZAP Klein for 30% off. We are really thrilled to have hosted Charlie Tsegeletos, the winemaker from Cline Family Cellars. We have one more question for somebody who logged in a little bit after you told the story of why the sheep are behind you in the vines. So just remind us why the sheep are there.
Those are little worker sheep. We run them out into the vineyards, you know, 2 or 3 times a year, and they eat. Instead of mowing, instead of disking, they eat down the weeds, and they expose the rodents that run around to the raptors. We'll also put them out there to eat some of the leaves if we want to expose some of the fruit by leaf pulling, and they sort of fertilize as they go, and they're self-contained, and they're just wonderful.
They're worker bees. We love that.
Worker sheep.
Well, I'm going to end with another fabulous shot here. This is the tasting room. Charlie, thank you so much for being part of Day Trip to Wine Country, presented by Citi, and we will see you again soon. Let's do another session. I'll talk to Shireen about it, where we talk about all the non-Zinfandel wines.
Okay, sounds like fun.
Because there are a lot of them.
Yeah, we do.
Excellent. All right, guys. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Tune in again soon. NewYorkWineEvents.com, and you can see the virtual tasting schedule. We do them all the time. And Charlie, stay safe, stay well. Good luck opening Friday, and we'll see you really soon.
All right, you take care. See you soon.
All right, take care, everybody. Bye-bye now.